10th class students will be continue with the history lesson. The limits of civil disobedience. Not all social groups were moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. One such group was the nation's untouchables, who from around 1930s had begun to call themselves Dalit or oppressed. For long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offending the Sanatanis, the conservative high caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years if untouchability was not eliminated. He called the untouchables Harijan, or the children of God, organized satyagraha to secure them entry into temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads and schools. He himself cleaned toilets to dignify the work of the bhangi, the sweepers, and persuaded upper caste to change their heart and give up the sign of untouchability. But many Dalit leaders were keen on a different political solution to the problems of community. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorates that would choose Dalit members for legislative councils. Political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. Dalit participation in the civil disobedience movement was therefore limited, particularly in the Maharashtra and Nagpur region, where their organization was quite strong. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalit into the Depressed Classes Association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the second round table conference by demanding separate electorates for Dalits. When the British government conceded Ambedkar's demand, Gandhiji began a fast unto death. He believed that separate electorates for Dalits would slow down the process of their integrations into society. Ambedkar ultimately accepted Gandhiji's position, and the result was the Pune Pact of September 1932. It gave the depressed class, later to be known as the scheduled caste, reserved seats in provincial and central legislative councils, but they were to be voted in by the general electorates. The Dalit movement, however, continued to be apprehensive of the Congress-led national movement. Some of the Muslim political organizations in India were also lukewarm in their response to the civil disobedience movement. After the decline of non-cooperation Khilafat movement, a large section of Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. From the mid-1920s, the Congress came to be more visible associated with openly Hindu religion. Nationalist groups like the Hindu Mahasabha. As relations between Hindu and Muslim worsened, each community organized religious procession with the militant favor, provoking Hindu-Muslim communal clashes and riots in various cities. Every riot depended the distance between the two communities. The Congress and the Muslim League made efforts to renegotiate an alliance, and in 1927 it appeared that such a unity could be forged. The important differences were over the question of representation in the future assemblies that were to be elected. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, one of the leaders of the Muslim League, was willing to give up the demand for separate electorates if Muslims were assured reserved seats in the Central Assembly and representation in proportion to population in the Muslim-dominated provinces Bengal and Punjab. Negotiations over the question of representation continued, but all hope of resolving the issue at the All Parties Conference in 1928 disappeared with B.R. Jakar of the Hindu Mahasabha strongly opposed efforts at compromise. When the civil disobedience movement started, there was thus an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust between communities. Alienated from the Congress, large sections of Muslims could not respond to the call for a united struggle. Many Muslim leaders and intellectuals expressed their concern about the status of Muslims as a majority within India. They feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of a Hindu majority. The scene of collective belongings. Nationalism spread when people began to believe that they are all part of the same nation, when they discover some unity that binds them together. But how did the nation become a reality in the minds of people? How did people belonging to different communities, regions, or language group develop a sense of collective belongings? This sense of collective belonging came partly through the experience or united struggles, but there were also a variety of cultural processes through which nationalism captured people's immigration, history and fraction, folklore and songs, popular print and symbols all played a part in the making of nationalism. The identity of the nation, as you know, is most often symbolized in a figure or image. This helps create an image with which people can identify the nation. It was in the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, that the identity of India came to be visually associated with the image of Bharat Maa. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee in the 1870s. He wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. Later it was included in his novel and widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Moved by the Swadeshi movement, Rabindranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata. You can see in this figure. In this painting, Bharat Mata is portrayed as an ascetic figure. She is a calm, composed, divine and spiritual. In subsequent years, the image of Bharat Mata acquired many different forms as it circulated in popular prints and was painted in different artists. A devotion to the mother figure came to be seen as evidence of one's nationalism in figure 14. This one. Ideas of nationalism also developed through a movement to revive Indian folklore. In late 19th century, Indian nationalists began recording folk tales sung by birds, and they toured villages to gather folk song and legends. These tales, they believed, gave a true picture of traditional culture that had been corrupted and damaged by outside forces. It was essential to preserve this folk tradition in order to discover one's national identity and restore a sense of pride in one's past. In Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore himself began collectively ballads, nursery rhymes, and myths, and led the movement for folk revivals. In Madras, Netasa Sastri published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tales. He believed that folklore was national literature. It was the most trustworthy manifestations of people's real thoughts and characteristics. As the movement developed, nationalist leaders became more and more aware of such icons and symbols in unifying peoples and inspiring in them a feeling of nationalism. During the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag, red, green, and yellow, was designed. It had 8 lotus representing 8 provinces of British India and a crescent moon representing Hindu and Muslim. By 1921, Gandhiji had designed the Swaraj flag. It was again a tricolor, red, green, and white, and had a spring wheel in the center representing the Gandhian ideal of self-help. Carrying the flag, holding it aloft during marches became a symbol of defiance. Another means of creating a feeling of nationalism was through reinterpretation of history. By the end of the 19th century, many Indians began feeling that to instill a sense of pride in the nation, Indian history had to be thought about differently. The British saw Indians as backward and primitive, incapable of governing themselves. In response, Indians began looking into the past to discover India's great achievements. They wrote about the glorious developments in ancient times when art and architecture, science and mathematics, religions and culture, law and philosophy, crafts and trade had flourished. This glorious time, in their way, was followed by a history of decline when India was colonized. These nationalist histories urge the readers to take pride in India's great achievement in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under British rule. These efforts to unify peoples were not without problems. When the past began glorified was Hindu, when the images celebrated were drawn from Hindu iconography, then people of other communities felt left out. Conclusion. As growing anger against the colonial government was thus bringing together various groups and classes of Indian into a common struggle for freedom in the first half of the 20th century, the Congress under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi tried to channel people's grievances into organized movements for independence. Though such movements, the nationalists tried to forge a national unity, but as we have seen, diverse groups and classes participated in these movements with varied aspirations and expectations. As their grievances were wide-ranging, freedom from colonial rule also meant different things to different people. The Congress continuously attempted to resolve differences and ensure that the demands of one group did not alienate another. This is precisely why the unity within the movements often broke down. The high points of Congress activity and the nationalist unity were followed by phases of disunity and inner conflict between groups. In other words, what was emerging was a nation with many voices wanting freedom from colonial rule. Quit India movement. The failure of the Cripps mission and the effects of World War II created widespread discontentment in India. This led Gandhiji to launch a movement calling for complete withdrawal of British from India. The Congress Working Committee, in its meeting in Wardha on 14 July 1942, passed the historic Quit India Revolution demanding the immediate transfer of power to the Indians and quit India. On 8 August 1942 in Bombay, All India Congress Committee endorsed the resolution which called a non-violent mass struggle on the widest possible scale throughout the country. It was on this occasion that Gandhiji delivered the famous "Do or Die" speech. The call for quit India almost brought the state machinery to a standstill in large parts of the country as people voluntarily threw themselves into the thick of the movement. People observed hartals and demonstrations, and processing were accompanied by nation songs and slogans. The movement was truly a mass movement which brought into its ambit thousands of ordinary people, namely students, workers, and peasants. It also saw the active participations of leaders, namely Jayaprakash Narayan, Saraf Ali, and Ram Manohar Lohia, and many women such as Matangini Azra in Bengal, Karnataka, Kanakatla Borna in Assam, and Rama Devi in Odisha. The British responded with much force, yet it took more than a year to suppress the movement.